The United States incarcerates more than 2 million people, making it the country with the highest in-prison population in the world. America's incarceration culture is reflected in various contexts, including the war on drugs and in school, in which criminalization has prevailed over other approaches to social problems. The mass incarceration era has also disproportionately impacted people of color, with them accounting for 60% of those in prison, but only 30% of the United States population. We as citizens of this country need to know what are the causes and consequences of mass incarceration on our society, and what constitutional tools are at our disposal to assist in ending the era of mass incarceration.
The drive in incarceration, the increase in incarceration actually started in 1973, and it increased throughout the 70s, the 80s, and 90s, and the early 2000s. Recently, have we actually seen any decline in prison for the first time in 40 years or so? It had nothing to do with crime. It was a political thing. It was a conservative takeover of U.S. politics and criminal justice generally, prisons specifically. So both Republicans and Democratic legislators and governors and presidents, members of Congress, push for more prisons to get tough movements. 3 strikes you're out, mandatory sentencing, drug war, more prison. So it didn't matter how much crime there was, we were putting more and more people in prison. There was a lot of challenges to the status quo and to arrangements of power in the US. The civil rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-Vietnam protests throughout the 60s and 70s, and there was a crackdown as a response to that. So major politicians at the federal level, and especially in the South, portrayed in states, they portrayed the civil rights movement as a crime issue, a law and order issue. And so cracking down on peaceful protests became a way to arrest and incarcerate people as a result. And so Democrats in the 60s embraced civil rights, in the 50s and 60s embraced civil rights and equality, with Kennedy and Johnson presidents pushing for equal rights laws and voting rights laws and that sort of thing. And Republicans used that to cause fear among white people to generate support for the Republican Party. And this is called famously the Southern Strategy by Richard Nixon. And his political consultant, Kevin Phillips, actually wrote about it ultimately and admitted that, yeah, we didn't say black, or we didn't say, we had code words for race, like states' rights and busing and things like that, that caused white people to be afraid of what the country would look like with true equality, and so they voted Republican as a way to restrict that. And then the Republican Party put in, and along with Democrats, they put in anti-crime policies to make criminal justice grow, which led to more imprisonment. It turns out that the U.S. drug policy, or what we call the drug war, is one of the major reasons why we have racial disparities in criminal justice. So law enforcement goes out and they're arresting people for breaking the law. It's often drug crimes. So drug arrests make up about 13% of all arrests that the U.S. police make every year in local departments and that sort of thing. And they target drugs that are disproportionately used by minorities, like crack cocaine. Even though a majority of users are white, they're disproportionately used by minorities. So that's one way it produces racial disparities. They also target outdoor drug markets, and minorities tend to sell drugs outside as opposed to inside. And they also target minority areas. And so as a result of those 3 factors, we have huge disparities in arrests. So even though African Americans, for example, are no more likely to use drugs than whites or sell, they're more likely to be arrested, convicted, and incarcerated for it. It goes back to the drug war. If you wait, 5 years, 85% or so of the inmates will be back. Now, generally, they might come back for a parole violation, a technical violation, as opposed to a new crime. Point is, they're not getting better because we're not changing their lives, and we're not changing the environments from which they come. So you take them out of a bad environment and rehabilitate them or incapacitate them and just hold them, and then you put them right back in the same environment. About the only hope we have is that they've gotten older and they've matured out of crime.
And it's a lot of money in prisons. So me personally, I think that they would like crime to continue, because you gotta understand, like, so many people are employed because of, like, simply because of crime. Like, we got judges, you got officers, correctional officers, you know, the food companies that supply like food to the prisons, and like all type of people like benefit off the criminal justice system. So it's a business, and I feel like they like to keep it going. The recidivism rate was around like 70-something%. Now it's around like 93%. Because of, you know, I feel like it's a part of, because of post release, because a lot of guys that get on post release, they can't handle all of the rules and stuff like that, and, you know, they get set up and then they go right back to prison for 9 months. Out here we're the minority, inside we're the majority, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, you got all different types of races in prison, but majority, of course, is black people. And a lot of Caucasians, you know what I mean, they grow up in good families. I'm not saying all of them. They grow up in good families, with people that teach them like morals and stuff like that. They work on them constantly. So like, even if they get into trouble, like the money their family has can get them a good lawyer. You know, they could work out a better deal. A lot of people of our color don't have that. You know what I mean? We don't have our families don't have the money to get a good lawyer, so we got to depend on the court-appointed lawyer. And of course, they're gonna get a better plea. You know, if they get a Caucasian would get a better plea if their family had money, if they went and paid for a lawyer, rather than me depending on a court-appointed lawyer.
Lots of them. New York are addressing this issue. New Jersey, New Mexico. Some of them have abolished the death penalty. Some of them have instituted policies to reduce incarceration for first-time offenders, and especially drug offenders, low-level drug offenders. Governors in those states have pushed for these policies. You mentioned groups, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, FAM. The Drug Policy Alliance, the Sentencing Project. There's lots of groups like this to ACL. President Obama has an initiative reforming the drug war, where he's invested in prior to release programs, reentry programs to help people get back into society. But also the White House has invested heavily in prevention education to stop people from using drugs as kids, and also to invest in treatment that works, so that people can get treatment for their drug problems if they're addicted. And as a result, we save a lot of money by not having them in prison.
Next, we will meet a man who is doing his part in combating recidivism rates by successfully reintegrating inmates into society and working with youth to prevent them from being victims of this mass incarceration era.
Link Incorporated is a local community-based organization, nonprofit that is, that provides residential reentry for people who've been formerly incarcerated. We also do a youth development program called Link Initiative to Educate, which is designed for African American males 16 to 21 around employment, training, and academic achievement. And we're teaching them things like understanding the hidden rules of middle class culture, helping them raise their children under what we call parenting practices of raising African American males and females under American occupation, helping them develop best practices of raising their children in a society that's sometimes prejudiced, discriminatory, and racist. So we're helping them be able to navigate and be better prepared to deal with some of the biases that sometimes keep them from being viewed as businessmen, entrepreneurs, and everyday citizens, and not as criminals or gangbangers. But we're about 88% successful, whereas our county and statewide rate is about 41%. of the people coming out of prison typically go back within 3 years. And the folks coming out of prison, if they come through our program, only about 12% find themselves back in prison after 3 years.
Well, first of all, they need to be aware. People need to learn the facts. There's lots of good information online. Everyone knows how to do a Google search where you can look up racial disparities in criminal justice, and you'll find these organizations and these groups. So get informed and know about things, know about the facts. And then if it concerns you as a citizen and you think that it's a problem, it's a threat to racial justice and equality in society, for example, if that concerns you, then there's lots of things you can do about it. You can write letters to your members of Congress. You can write letters to your state legislature. You can join a group and work on their community activities. You can form a community alliance, a group of community organizations in your neighborhood to address it, and that's what's happening across the country.